So what is the strategy? One is I want to talk about the vaccines. The first polio vaccine was developed by Jonas Salk. It is killed wild virus. It was developed in 1955. It contains all three types, types 1, 2, and 3. The oral polio vaccine was first developed in 1961 by Albert Sabin. It had live attenuated individual viruses, 1, 2, and 3. It then was formulated into a trivalent vaccine. And now the vaccine in standard use around the world is bivalent type 1, 3, because type 2 has been eradicated. The inactivated polio vaccine is usually made from 3 wild polio viruses. And one of the concerns is there have been leaks from manufacturing plants, so there is concern with that. China and Japan have been able to make the inactivated polio vaccine from Sabin vaccine viruses, which adds an element of safety. It must be administered by injection. A high proportion of vaccinees who get 3 doses have neutralizing antibodies to all 3 types. It's more costly to produce than OPV. It's equivalent to OPV in inducing pharyngeal immunity and oral transmission, but it is clearly inferior to OPV in inducing gut immunity. Another factor is the activated polio vaccine is of equivalent immunogenicity in both the developing and the developed world. The oral polio vaccine is easy to administer. You can train non-technical volunteers. It produces individual protection, and it prevents infection by inducing immunity in both the gut and the pharynx, thereby effectively decreasing transmission and protecting the community. On the good side, it can spread by shedding to nearby contacts. So if your immunization program hasn't worked well, you can induce immunity in some non-vaccinees. Unfortunately, we have the adverse effects of VAP, as I mentioned before. And what we discovered first in 2000, which is a bad thing about the shedding, is the ability of these viruses to take on the properties of wild viruses and induce outbreaks. So again, to get rid of polio, we're going to not only have to get rid of the wild viruses, we're going to have to stop eventually the use of the oral vaccine. One of the issues with the oral vaccine is it's far less effective in the developing world than it is in the industrialized world. For type 1, 2, and 3, you can see here after a 3-dose schedule of trivalent OPV in the US, you had 97 to 100% seroconversion. In the developing world, the best was type 2, but you had substantially lower seroconversion. And in India, it was even lower than that. And what this means is not that you can't get higher, but this is not adequate to interrupt transmission. And it means you have to give many more doses to get to the herd immunity threshold. And this is just some data from the old days showing the impact of IPV on intestinal excretion. And this was a type 1 OPV challenge in 4 groups of people: susceptible controls, IPV vaccinated, OPV vaccinated, natural immune. And what you can see here after challenge is there was no difference in fecal shedding in the IPV vaccinated and the susceptible controls. However, the duration of shedding was lower, but not as good as with the oral vaccine. And the average titer shed was about a log lower with IPV, but 2 logs greater than OPV. And if you calculate an excretion index, you can see that IPV is far better than nothing, but far worse than OPV, which is why OPV has been the vaccine of choice for terminating transmission of wild virus. So what is the strategy? OPV is still used in most developing countries. Routine immunization is the backbone of the strategy. Most countries use 3 doses at 6, 10, and 14 weeks, and many of the highest risk countries also have a birth dose. But because this is inadequate to get to the immunity levels, virtually all countries using OPV have national immunization days, often called supplemental immunization activities, or SIAs, where they vaccinate all children less than 5 years of age, regardless of vaccination status. You give them more doses than the basic 3 or 4. And you may up that age depending on whether you're seeing polio cases and infections in older people. A third aspect is careful surveillance, and this is acute flaccid paralysis surveillance, as well as what is becoming more and more prominent is sewage sampling or environmental sampling and looking for virus there. And when you see continued transmission, what's done is mop-up campaigns where you often bring the oral polio vaccine door to door to try and reach herd immunity thresholds.